Hey, Big Love fam. Welcome to Super Freak. This is a high vibe podcast, y'all, exploring all things frequencies, how they govern, form, shape our realities, and are the key to living from your full potential. It's non-woo convos about super woo shit, unpacking what I call the science of self, from body and soul literacy to the power of understanding vibration, higher consciousness, quantum physics, and spiritual psych. Let this podcast become a resource for you on your journey to self-mastery. If you're curious and ready to free your mind, unlock the body, and truly become limitless, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Hallie. This is Super Freak, Awakening for the Next Gen. Let's go. All right, y'all, let's jump into this mini podcast episode about the difference between an identity death and an ego death, because in the spiritual community, it is talked about so much, especially with the ketamine bros who are doing psychedelics and microdosing ketamine on the regular, and they're having a quote unquote ego death. No, this is not what's happening. Just to clarify, I want to give you the role of the ego. First, the role is part of the structure of how the brain works. It's part of the structure of how we are created. We have to have the ego because it's a translation kit. It's basically a way that we see ourselves. If you look at the ego as a lens, which you see yourself through, imagine that you have ego, right? You have the small s, and then you see yourself through the lens of ego. You're going to project a very insecure version of yourself because the small s is an amplifier of who you're not. The ego, similarly, is an amplifier to who you're not, there to maintain the level of awareness that you're at. So if you see yourself through your big S, through your higher self, for example, and you shine that light through the lens of ego, the ego is going to help sustain that level of awareness and become a propellant. It's almost like atmosphere to a plane. So when people say that they're having an ego death, what they're doing is they're shedding and dissolving identity layers that are creating more distance between who they are in their small s and who they truly are as their big S, or said differently, who they think they are, and then versus who they actually are. Those two things and those two experiences are very different. So the dissolution process is why awakening is so hard for people, because you continually have identity deaths over and over and over again. It's constant. It's all the time because you're constantly refining your own, let's say, rendering. You're in a constant state of refinement, like going into high def, pixelation, higher pixelation, things like this. So just to clarify a bit there about what an identity death is versus an ego death. I think it's very important to talk about this because, again, the spiritual community is so convoluted with their definitions right now. It's a mess. Another thing you'll see is part of false light in the spiritual community is you'll see people who are in the awakening community, for example, but you get this feeling about them where they're still projecting a version of who they want you to be through the lens of ego. It is just, let's say, a different identity that they've taken on. So if someone is playing a character of, I'm posing in front of my Audi and I'm so woke, I know all these details about mushrooms and everybody needs to start, eating more avocados. And this is the truth about psychedelics. And they go and have several plant medicine experiences, they start to dissolve a little bit of this false identity and projection, but instead they move into, I'm Mr. Neo-woke identity. It's still, the light is still refracting itself through a version of the small s. So there wasn't necessarily an identity dissolution as much as an identity bifurcation. Similar identity, different costume. So it hasn't actually been dissolved. The person may be creating more workarounds, may have more awarenesses, but it's still coming through the lens of the small s self. Someone with moving through a big S would not care about anything that they're involved with, really. You really have a detachment of self. You're in service and of the work, and you're in service to the spirit of whatever it is you're building. I mean, it truly is a submission. for me, I am in deep submission to the spirit of what this is, of what Super Freak is, of what I'm building, and I'm in service to it. I really become an irrelevant character in this whole movie. Very few people that I've come across in the spiritual community have that. There's still a lot of distortions. So if you want to continue to have conversations around identity death and ego death, message me on Telegram. And in the meantime, y'all, I will see you on the next episode.
Thanks so much for listening, you guys. Please make sure to leave a review and follow the fun on social media because that's how it works in this world. And in the meantime, get your freak on. I'll see you in the next session.